What's your favorite scary movie? These are some of mine. Hey everyone, welcome to the Dyl Pickle Movie Network. I am Dylan Randazzo, and welcome to my review for Scream 6. I'm glad they went back to numbering these things. I know Scream 2022 was a play on how all the modern franchises, when they kind of reboot their franchises, just end up calling themselves the original title, like Halloween, Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street, Child's Play, etc., etc. But we are back with Scream 6. This is obviously the sixth installment of the Scream franchise. This is the second installment directed by Matt Bettinelli, Olpin, and Tyler Gillett, the two behind the last Scream movie, and of course, Ready or Not. Actually, Ready or Not star Samara Weaving has a great little cameo in this film. I was a big fan of Scream 2022. I know over time, some people haven't necessarily thought it aged well. I actually haven't revisited it since I first saw it, so I couldn't really tell you if it still holds up, but I generally liked it. I thought it was a good legacy sequel that commented on legacy sequels well, and that's the beauty of a Scream movie, is how it comments on what it is doing in terms of building a franchise. And I think that's what's made all the Scream movies successful to some extent. And even Scream 6, I think, does comment on the fact that it is a continuation in a franchise, and it brings a lot of great meta stuff to the table. But this time it's a little different because they set it in New York, like a lot of franchises have done. They throw their characters into some entirely new environment. This one takes place 1 year after the events of Scream 2022. Four of our characters from the last film, the core four, if you will, they do don themselves that name, consisting of Melissa Barrera's Sam Carpenter, Jenna Ortega's Tara Carpenter, as well as Jasmine Savoy Brown and Mason Gooding as siblings Chad and Mindy. They find themselves in New York after relocating after the last Scream, and a lot of it deals with obviously a new killer on the loose in New York City, and just the idea of the threat in this bigger environment, and also dealing with the trauma of what happened with Woodsboro in the first Scream film, or the last Scream film, which was the first of this new wave of Scream films. It was the first and the last and the fifth. This previous Scream film, really dealing with the psyche of how they're coping with that. In Sam's case, she is coping with it very strongly and going to therapy for it, really attacking it head on, whereas her sister Tara is kind of brushing it off, trying not to accept that it happened at all. So you see a really good kind of clash between those two sisters. But I really can't go much further into Scream 6 without spoiling. And I didn't want to make this a spoiler review because there's a lot to talk about with spoilers, and I only have so much time. So if you want to hear some in-depth thought on spoiler talk, I figured why not make next month's Draft Day, a show we do here on the channel, Scream themed. So April will be Scream Draft Day themed, where we will be talking about some of the best killers, killer reveals, and just different twists and stuff in those movies. Because I do think it's important to talk about the spoilers of this movie, but it does make it hard because it just came out a few weeks ago. So I'm not going to do it right here in this video, but if you want to go and do a little bit of spoiler talk, I'm sure we'll talk about all the things involving reveals and all that jazz next month on the Draft Day for Scream. So mark that on your calendars, even though I don't have a date for it yet. But what I can talk about in this review are three things: the characters, and more specifically the legacy characters, because this sequel does deal a lot with the legacies of these characters. Also, the actual scare factor of this film and the gore that we see in this new setting and the use of that setting. And of course, the meta commentary, because I think when people go into these movies, they look at three things: the characters, the scares, and the meta commentary. So starting with the characters, I do think the core four are pretty much what you see from the last film. You get a lot more of in this film. I do think Melissa Barrera's performance in particular, I think last time she was playing it very kind of straight one note, specifically because that was her character choice. But I think here we get a little bit more range from her as a performer, and I think we get a little bit more, we see a few more shades of Sam, especially because they do still play into that whole supernatural Billy Loomis thing, the fact that she is Billy Loomis's daughter. That was a spoiler from the last film. Sorry if I spoiled it. But we do get a lot more of that as well, just her kind of struggling with that. And we do see her kind of have a few darker moments that I think are some of her best acting in this franchise. But I do think her role allows for the least bit of range, especially when compared to the other three of the core four and some of the new characters. I think because she's kind of the core of that group, the other characters around her are just more vibrant personalities. But that's not a flaw in Melissa Barrera's performance as much as it is just the writing of that character itself. But I really do love Jasmine Savoy Brown and Mason Gooding in this. And if you've watched the channel, you know I'm obsessed with Jenna Ortega's performances. just in everything she's done. I really think she is one of the most talented performers working today, especially in horror, because she, unlike any other person I know, any other actress I've seen, has been able to convey pain better than anyone else. If you watched X or watched the last Scream movie or this Scream movie, I mean, every time she's in pain, every time she's getting stabbed or falls or anything, it seems like it's actually happening on set. And we know it's not. It would be absolutely crazy to make some actor go through it, but she sells it so well. She sells pain so well. And even in The Fallout, a movie that doesn't deal with actual physical pain in her sense, but just emotional pain, like her emotional pain is so raw and real. And a lot of her best acting is more minimalist acting because she's able to sell so much power with just such a simple gaze and just her mere presence. Some of the other characters that we get introduced to, Jack Champion, who you might have seen as Spider in Avatar. He's much older in this one because Avatar was filmed way before this one. He plays Ethan Landry, who is another welcome member of this new gang. He kind of has the nerd archetype, and he plays it really well, kind of the innocent nerd who doesn't really understand exactly what's going on, but kind of just tags along for the laughs and for the fun until he realizes that there's something deeper going on, and then he wants no part of it, and he plays that really well. We also, of course, have Dermot Mulrooney as Wayne Bailey, the detective behind this case of killings. He brings some great moments to the film as well, especially a lot of the emotional moments that he has involving something that happens to one of his kids that is really, really heartbreaking to see in the moment. And then, of course, some little cameos here and there that I'm not going to spoil because I don't really know how well known it is that they are in the film, but there are some welcome faces that you may not know are showing up from that have never been in the Scream franchise before that have been doing a good job. I'll tell you one of them, and that is what I alluded to earlier, Samara Weaving. She is kind of the centerpiece of the opening, just like Drew Barrymore was in the original. She gets to kind of open the film in a really exciting way. And then, of course, you have your legacy characters, and that is Hayden Panetierre is returning after her hiatus since Scream 4. We weren't even sure if she survived Scream 4, but she did. Kirby Reed, and she has also become an FBI detective since her time in Scream 4, and she is basically hunting down the killer. And the extra added bonus to Hayden Panettiere being there is that the killer this time is leaving a different ghost face mask from the previous entries of the franchise at every crime scene. So you kind of get a little Easter egg action, and you get to see Hayden Panettiere kind of tap into some of those older moments of negative nostalgia from Scream 4, some of those bad memories she has. And then we have Courteney Cox returning as Gale Weathers. I know a big topic of conversation since the last one was, were Neve Campbell and Courteney Cox coming back? Neve Campbell was not rumored to be coming back, and she does not make an appearance. I thought there might be a world where they surprise us with her presence, but they don't. Just Courteney Cox shows up. It's very interesting looking at these legacy characters because while it is awesome to see them, and it's great to finally see Gale get on the phone with Ghostface, I don't think the two legacy characters, Hayden Panettiere's Kirby and Courteney Cox's Gale, really added much to this film. And it sucks because I like them both as performers, but I think the scenes they're in just feel like disposable scenes that could really sell a trailer and do provide some good gore moments and just some good suspense in general. But in terms of the overall story, I feel like if you took them out of it, I think the story could still exist on their own. It really is just about the core four, and then of course about Ghostface and the revelations that come about that. But I really don't think the two of them necessarily needed to be there. They add to it, but they don't necessarily feel vital to the point where at times I was just wondering if they should have just given them the happy ending that they gave Sidney Prescott, because Gale even mentions in this film that Sidney got her a happy ending, and it almost makes me wish that Courteney Cox's character had done the same, because it just feels like they keep trying to find a way to have these legacy characters in these sequels for all these franchises, but don't always necessarily need them to further the narrative. I think the last film, what it did successfully is using Dewey's character, especially in that film, I think added a lot to it. And I think Neve Campbell's presence in Scream 4, essentially as a legacy character, because keep in mind, Scream 4 came out about 10 years after Scream 3. So that in itself was a legacy sequel. And I think Sidney Prescott is a really great presence in that film. But I feel like with every additional film, I'm finding less and less room for these legacy characters. And I think that takes us into the actual meta commentary, which was one of my 3 talking points I wanted to bring up. And that is that the Scream films, why they work so well is that they comment on what they're doing, and they kind of are the self-aware, kind of laugh at ourselves type film. And in this film specifically, I feel like they really retread a lot of beats from the last film, to where a lot of the actual commentary deals with legacy sequels and what happens in legacy sequels and which characters are disposable because it's a legacy sequel, when I feel like that was also what was being talked about in the last film. So it feels like there's not a lot of new commentary brought into this specific film. There's a little bit of added extra commentary based on who the killer is revealed to be, but I just don't feel like a lot of the actual legacy nature of the film had anything new to present itself as. I think the last film kind of presented everything it needed to in terms of being a legacy sequel, and this just feels like it's kind of saying the same exact thing, just setting it in a new location, which brings us to the scares themselves. I think the gore is definitely amped up a notch, and the gore is exciting, and the kills are really, really exciting, and everything's well staged. I do think setting it in New York, I would have liked them to kind of expand on that a bit more. I think there's one great sequence, and it's the kind of one we saw in the trailer where they're all in a subway and there are multiple people dressed up as Ghostface. Ghostface is a masked killer. And when you have so many people wearing masks, it's hard to tell who the real killer is. And I think they should have played a lot more into that, because a lot of these scares and these set pieces are set within apartments or within a college campus. And it feels like it could have been on any college campus or any apartment. It didn't feel specific to New York City like the marketing was flooded with. The marketing was really selling it as Scream hits New York. The posters were all about the subway lines, and there was a lot of the Times Square kind of lights in some of the posters, to where I wish they just utilized the backdrop of the city so well. I live in New York City. I know the day-to-day terrors just in existing in New York City on its own. Now add a Ghostface killer to that, I think it could have opened up some really, really interesting set pieces and kills that I just don't think this film really leaned into. I wish it had leaned further into them. That being said, I think the Scream franchise is so consistent, and I think it's because they find characters that you love to fall in love with. And I think this core four is a really great bunch that we love. A lot of the new characters are great characters that we immediately latch onto because of their performances and the way the characters are written. And yes, although the actual commentary is still feels recycled from the last film, it is still an interesting new lens on a horror film than we're used to seeing in any other horror films being made right now. Like, I think even though we're still getting the same commentary, we're still getting commentary. And I think that's what makes all these Scream films feel fresh in comparison to other films. In comparison to other Scream films, I don't think this feels as fresh, but compared to other horror films, this definitely still feels fresh. And I think that's why people keep coming back to these films, because they are very exciting, and because these are essentially murder mysteries, and we do have a fun time kind of sussing out the killer. And I think that was one thing that kind of held it back for me as well, is that I kind of sussed out who the killer was early on. And I don't want to go into specifics because I don't want to spoil anything, but there is a comment made about this film and this existence of this film in comparison to another Scream film, that when they immediately made the connection, I immediately went, oh, so that means that this person's probably the killer, because they were comparing this Scream film to another Scream film. Again, it's so hard to talk about with spoilers, so stay tuned for that spoiler Scream draft day in April, because I'm going to actually talk about the killer reveal specifically when we get there. But I do think a lot of it was kind of softened. The blow was a little softened by the fact that I was intently looking at a certain individual as a potential killer. Now, as we know with Scream, maybe there's more than one killer. And I think that kind of lends for a few more fun moments, because now you're wondering, okay, who else may be in on it, if any? I mean, sometimes it's just one killer. We saw in Scream 3, there was just one killer. So I think that is what still keeps me excited for these movies. Even when I think I figured out one killer, maybe there are others that I haven't considered or thought about. And the idea of this killer kind of leaving a different Ghostface mask of previous Ghostface at the crime scenes, I think that's really fun. And I did like the terror, even though I think they could have been more inventive with the city backdrop. I think the scares themselves were really successful. So I do still think this is a recommendation, even though it's one of the weaker Scream films. It's still, the weakest Scream films are still stronger than a lot of the other films in these other long-running franchises like Halloween or like Friday the 13th or Nightmare on Elm Street. I think those franchises, they got tired after a while in certain bits and pieces, but I think Scream, even when it gets tired, is still another franchise's best. So I think this is definitely a recommendation, especially if you want to get a taste of New York and you don't live in New York. I think if you live in New York, you're going to be a little disappointed in how they use the city. But if you've never been in New York, you might like some of these set pieces because this might be more foreign territory to you. It's all a matter of perspective. And I think from my personal perspective, I wanted them to do a little bit more with the setting. But I could see someone really enjoying this because it is just different in itself. It's not Woodsboro, and that alone is enough for them. But I really do think this is going to still be a crowd pleaser if you go decide to see it. So that was my review for Scream 6. As I've been saying all week, this is catch-up week, catching up on reviews, and I'm finally back with my last catch-up video. The next video I'm going to be making is Shazam! Fury of the Gods on Friday, and then we will have officially caught up on all the big releases of 2023. It has been a lot of fun reviewing these films back to back to back to back because I've been mulling them over in my head for quite some time. So it's been nice to finally put my thoughts here to the screen. I want to thank all of these individuals and groups here that donated as part of our 24-hour subathon and continue to be great supporters of the channel. Your support is not going unnoticed, and I thank you from the bottom of my heart. Your names will be here for every single video we put forth on the channel, so thank you so much, and I will keep saying thank you until the end of the year and beyond. So stay tuned for that review for Shazam 2 tomorrow. Otherwise, that was it for me. Let me know in the comments below what you thought of this film if you saw it, and please do not spoil. Again, spoiler Scream Draft Day is going to be in April. You can talk about spoilers all you want in the live chat there. Until then, I'll see you next time.